When you do any of the type of training I am showing here in this video, you hear a lot of people say a lot of things. I will start with one of the most common. If you do that to someone, you will go to jail. And that is true. If you stab the shit out of somebody, especially for no reason, you are probably going to go to jail. However, the use of force is a scaled thing, and you have to be able to scale it to be reasonable to the situation at hand. Now, my tire checker there, if I was in an argument with somebody and I pulled it out and I smashed them in the jaw, that would be assault. For sure, that would be assault. However, if I was in a situation where I saw somebody stabbing toddlers in a park to make a political point, like what happened in Paris a few years ago, I think that pulling my tire checker out of my van and going to work to try and save those children would be applauded as heroics. Also, the person who says that you'll go to jail for this or that is someone who is unable to see past the common bar fight as a self-defense situation, which isn't self-defense. This is simply a mutual fight which shows a lot of emotional immaturity and bad life choices. Self-defense is something else entirely. And the use of force that you apply to counter that has to be appropriate to the situation. But if someone's using lethal force against you, lethal force is appropriate and reasonable. So if someone tells you what your training will land you in jail, just look at them and say, if my actions are not reasonable to the situation. Hopefully that will give them pause and let them think about how much they actually know about self-defense. But you should know what is considered reasonable and what your self-defense laws are in your country and culture. Also, if you carry tools that can be improvised as self-defense weapons, make sure you understand the legalities around that in your country and culture. You won't have a stick if you get into a fight. First of all, that is a two-part statement of stupidity. The first part is you won't have a stick, but we'll get into that in a second. The second part is if you get into a fight. When it comes to personal protection, you are never fighting. You are protecting yourself. Getting into a fight is for emotionally stunted people who can't control their actions when they're angry or overwhelmed emotionally. Don't get into fights. Don't be a meathead. As far as you'll never have a stick, well, I carry a walking stick when I walk my dogs. I have had one of my students defend himself with a broomstick because sticks are easy to improvise. But more importantly, there's much more to martial arts than just personal protection and self-defense. If that is the only depth you're going to take to your martial arts, you probably won't do it for very long. However, martial arts does so much for you. First of all, using a stick is light resistance training. It is good for your health. It is good for your body. It builds strength. There's so many physical benefits to it. There's emotional benefits and there are psychological benefits in being with a group of positive people who are training together. There's trust that is built. I could go on and on, but our NIS training or Eskrima training or any kind of weapons training with other people builds a lot of connection. It creates a lot of trust. It is a lot of fun. So there is all of those things that are a huge factor as to why we train. Also, if you are going to train to counter weapons, you should know how to use those weapons because countering them requires you to know how those weapons are going to be used against you. If you have no idea how a good knife man will use a knife or a good stick fighter will use a stick, you probably will never be able to counter a decent weapons practitioner who wants to do you harm. Now, your chances of meeting up with an actual weapons practitioner are really slim, but if you train on top of martial arts type weapons training, if you train things like the Medusa method and other criminal-based knife methods, you will have a good idea how vulnerable you are to edged weapons. And once you learn that, you will be less likely to fight over material things or your ego if you understand just how dangerous edged weapons are. If you practice edged weapons combatives, you will know just how horrific and terrible a knife can be in the hands of an untrained, committed attacker. Understanding that makes me much more cautious and much more friendly when I have to deal with people who are living a hard lifestyle. I deal with people living on the streets all the time. I treat them with respect because I see them as people. But this is not just a positive attitude thing. This is a survival thing. If you walk around with empathy and kindness, you are far less likely to have to defend yourself. This has even saved my ass when I was doing security. I got into a conflict with a group of homeless men who were active in their addictions, and one of them was getting very amped up. But because I treated them decently whenever I had to kick them out of the heated parking lot in the early mornings, it was the other guys I had made friendships with who stepped in and calmed the situation down. I didn't have to do a thing. This is the art of fighting without fighting that Bruce Lee talked about. I was very lucky in that situation, but it wasn't just luck. It was simply karma at work. Because I was a decent human being to these people, they were decent human beings to me, and it paid off. If I was an asshole, there's a pretty good chance that situation would have escalated to the point where I got a blade stuck between my ribs. One of my co-workers almost got stabbed there. It was his shank vest and his fighting skills that saved him, but I believe it was his demeanor that put him in that situation. And while I work hard on all these different skills, I have to say that is what I want to leave you with. The biggest part of training for self-defense or countering violence or whatever you want to call it is being a decent human being.